We're probably all well aware of NATO. We know NATO was created to counter the Soviet Union, and then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO was used to encroach upon the borders of the Russian Federation. And to this day, not only is NATO engaged in expanding ever eastward, but they are also involved in wars all over the planet, even in areas that don't really even make sense for NATO to be involved in, like Afghanistan, for example. NATO and the nations that take part in these conflicts, they are guilty of the worst crimes against humanity of the 21st century. They are incredibly dangerous. As a matter of fact, they are one of the greatest threats to global peace and stability that exists today. There's also the Quad. What is the Quad? You might have heard of it, you might not have. This is a US-led alliance in the Indo-Pacific region, and it's made up of the US itself, Japan, Australia, and India. And the aim of the Quad Alliance is to encircle and contain China, to confront China in Asia. And of course, ultimately, this is all about upholding US primacy in the Indo-Pacific region, even though the US is not located in Asia. So it's no surprise that China has thought of ways of countering the Quad, and Russia has constantly thought of ways of countering NATO and its encroachment on its borders. And then it should be no surprise that Russia and China are working together. So I want to point out this article from New Eastern Outlook. This is a journal that I also contribute to. It's by Salman Rafi Sheikh. China and Russia close ranks to counter the US-led Quad. And of course, they're talking about Russia and China working together on a kind of a military level. And they're talking about being a pillar of world peace and stability. And if you wanted a quick example of that, look at what Russia did in Syria. They prevented the US from turning Syria into another Libya or another Iraq. And even though what the US did to Syria caused it serious damage, they were unsuccessful in toppling the government and destroying the entire country. But this is the part that jumped out at me and that I think is most important. This is from the foreign minister of China. We will set an example of strategic mutual trust by firmly supporting each other in upholding core and major interests, jointly opposing color revolution, and countering disinformation, and safeguarding national sovereignty and political security. And what they're talking about is Western propaganda and Western political meddling, including right here specifically mentioned color revolution. These are US-funded and backed separatist movements, political opposition groups, protests in the streets, and even terrorism. So it's interesting that Russia and China are openly talking about countering color revolution. I think this is a common ground between Russia and China, that there could be space there for other countries being targeted by color revolution, because it's not just Russia and China. It's true that the US targets both of these countries with color revolution tactics. In China, the US is actively undermining peace and stability in places like Hong Kong, Taiwan, Tibet, Xinjiang, and in Russia, we've seen recent protests being led by US-backed opposition figures. But then there's all these countries along the peripheries of Russia and China, all in Eastern Europe, countries like Belarus, for example. We saw the protests there. That's being driven by the US. And we've seen protests here in Southeast Asia, here in Thailand, and now in neighboring Myanmar. All of these countries are facing the same problem Russia and China are facing. Wouldn't it make sense that if the US has its Quad and its NATO and is stirring up trouble for Russia and China and countries along their periphery, wouldn't it make sense for all of those countries to work together to protect themselves? If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing to this channel as well as to my video channel on Odyssey in case YouTube shuts my channel down. The links to that are in the video description below. Please check out this article. I'm going to pin it at the top of the comments. New Eastern Outlook is censored on Twitter and Facebook. So please go visit this article, give them some views, because You're not even allowed to share the link to this article on Facebook or Twitter. And as always, thank you for watching.